In 235 AD, the Roman Empire entered an era of turmoil that would nearly destroy it. Emperor Severus Alexander, the last ruler of the Severan dynasty, tried to maintain peace through diplomacy, especially with the Germanic tribes threatening the northern frontiers. His approach, however, angered his own legions, who saw negotiations as weakness. Frustrated by perceived incompetence and inadequate pay, the soldiers mutinied, brutally murdering Alexander and his mother on the Rhine. This act was more than just regicide, it was the signal that military loyalty had replaced political legitimacy. Rome was no longer governed by dynastic succession or the Senate's authority. It was ruled by whichever general could command the largest army. This single event unleashed a half-century of civil war, barbarian invasions, and economic disaster. The empire's vast borders became impossible to defend as generals fought each other for power. What began as a mutiny on a distant frontier became the opening chapter in the near collapse of the greatest empire in the ancient world. The aftermath of Severus Alexander's death plunged Rome into anarchy. The empire became a playground for ambitious generals who declared themselves emperors, often supported by the legions they commanded. Between 235 and 284 AD, at least 26 rulers claimed the imperial title, most meeting violent deaths. This constant turnover created a cycle of instability. Each new emperor promised reform, but had to spend vast sums on bribes and gifts to keep the army loyal, further bankrupting the state. Civil wars erupted regularly, leaving provinces devastated as armies pillaged the lands they were meant to protect. The Senate, once the heart of Roman politics, had been reduced to a ceremonial body, powerless against military might. The empire's resources, financial, military, and human, were consumed not by foreign wars but by its own internal conflicts. These struggles made Rome vulnerable to external enemies and shattered the belief that the empire was eternal. The might of Rome was bleeding out, one usurper at a time. As civil war tore the empire apart, enemies took advantage. Along the Rhine and Danube, Germanic tribes like the Alemanni, Goths, and Franks launched devastating raids, sometimes penetrating deep into Roman territory. Entire towns were looted and burned, and civilians fled in terror. In the east, the newly powerful Sassanid Empire pressed its advantage, invading Roman lands in Mesopotamia and Syria. In 260 AD, Emperor Valerian suffered one of Rome's greatest humiliations when he was captured alive by King Shapur, a catastrophic blow to imperial prestige. The image of a Roman emperor enslaved shocked the world and emboldened further attacks. These invasions were no longer temporary raids. They were sustained campaigns aimed at tearing the empire apart. Rome's legions, once invincible, were overextended and demoralized. Without a stable central government, responses were slow and ineffective. The empire's enemies saw weakness everywhere, and for the first time in centuries, the survival of Rome itself seemed in doubt. Wars, invasions, and political chaos devastated Rome's economy. To pay for endless civil wars and appease the legions, emperors resorted to debasing the currency, reducing the silver content of coins until they were practically worthless. Inflation spiraled out of control, prices skyrocketed while the value of money collapsed. Trade networks crumbled as roads became unsafe and pirates prowled the seas. Agricultural output dropped as farms were abandoned due to invasions, conscription, and crushing taxation. Cities that had once thrived on commerce and culture began to shrink as people fled to the countryside for survival. The empire transitioned from a thriving economic powerhouse to a fragmented, subsistence-based society. For ordinary Romans, this meant empty markets, food shortages, and a daily struggle to survive. The proud prosperity that had once defined the empire had withered away, leaving only the shell of a once great civilization. The economic collapse didn't just weaken Rome, it eroded the very foundation upon which its power rested. By 260 AD, the western provinces had had enough. Constant invasions, civil wars, and neglect from Rome led Gaul, Britain, and Hispania to secede under the leadership of the capable general Postumus. Known as the Gallic Empire, this breakaway state functioned independently for over a decade, complete with its own administration, currency, and military. Remarkably, it was more effective at defending its borders than Rome itself during this period, successfully repelling Germanic raids. For the first time, the illusion of Rome's unbreakable unity was shattered. Though Emperor Aurelian eventually reconquered the territory, the damage was permanent. The empire's cohesion could no longer be taken for granted. The Gallic Empire proved that Rome's provinces could and would survive without Rome. It was a foretaste of the eventual permanent divisions that would define the empire's later history. While the West splintered, the East saw its own dramatic upheaval. Palmyra, a wealthy desert city-state, rose to prominence under the rule of Queen Zenobia. After Rome's failures to defend the East from Persian incursions, Zenobia seized control of Syria, Egypt, and much of Asia Minor, creating what was effectively a new Eastern empire. She ruled with intelligence and ambition, presenting herself as an equal to Rome, and even striking coins in her own name. Her brief empire demonstrated how regional powers could thrive amid Rome's decline. Although Emperor Aurelian eventually defeated Zenobia and restored the East to Roman control, her rebellion exposed the empire's vulnerability. The message was clear: when central authority falters, ambitious leaders will fill the void. As if war and politics were not enough, nature unleashed its fury on the empire. Waves of plague, likely smallpox or measles, swept through the provinces, killing millions and decimating armies already weakened by constant war. Fields went untilled, leading to famine and mass starvation. Cities, once bustling centers of culture and commerce, became ghost towns filled with the sick and dying. The despair was so profound that many Romans began to question their traditional gods, turning instead to new religions that promised hope and salvation. Christianity, once a persecuted sect, began to gain converts during this time of suffering. For many, the crisis of the 3rd century was not just the collapse of an empire, it was the end of a world they had known for centuries. In 270 AD, Rome found an unlikely savior in the soldier Emperor Aurelian. A brilliant commander, he crushed the invading barbarian tribes, defeated the Gallic Empire in the west, and subdued Queen Zenobia's Palmyrene Empire in the east. For the first time in decades, the empire was whole again. Aurelian's efforts earned him the title Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. He also strengthened Rome's defenses, building massive new walls around the capital to guard against future threats. However, his reign was short-lived. In 275 AD, he was assassinated by his own officers. His death underscored the tragic reality of the era. Even the greatest leaders could not guarantee lasting stability. Aurelian had restored the empire, but he could not cure the disease of internal division. When Diocletian took power in 284 AD, he recognized that the old imperial system was broken beyond repair. His solution was radical: divide the empire's administration into 4 parts under the Tetrarchy, ensuring no single man could dominate or destabilize the state. He reformed taxation, stabilized borders, and attempted to control inflation. Under his rule, Rome survived the crisis and entered a new phase of existence, more bureaucratic, militarized, and authoritarian. Though the empire would never return to its former glory, Diocletian's reforms gave it centuries of renewed life, paving the way for the Byzantine Empire. His reign marked the end of the crisis of the 3rd century and the dawn of a transformed Rome. The crisis of the 3rd century was one of history's greatest warnings. Rome nearly collapsed not solely because of barbarian invasions, but because of internal decay, political instability, economic failure, and a loss of unity. Though the empire survived, it emerged forever changed. The lesson is timeless. No empire, no matter how powerful, is immune to decline when its foundations are compromised. The Roman experience shows how great civilizations often fall, not with a sudden crash, but with a long, painful unraveling. For Rome, the crisis was a wake-up call, but for history, it remains a cautionary tale of how power can wither from within.